It used to be that we had bad kids who were locked away in reform schools and sick kids who were locked away in mental hospitals.
The master only represents God on the earth. And if you can't stand naked in front of your master, you can't stand naked in front of your God.
The compromising of politicians, the compromising of businessmen, but worst of all, the corruption of key institutions of government.
"29 disturbing documentaries, 7 levels." I've put together some of the most unsettling, disturbing documentaries ever made. We will start with some eerie and unnerving documentaries and slowly work down into some of the most gut-wrenching and malicious footage ever captured on film. Let's start at the tip of the iceberg. Level 1. Grizzly Man. Grizzly Man chronicles the life and death of Timothy Treadwell, a self-professed environmentalist who spent 13 summers living among grizzly bears in Alaska's Katmai National Park. His entire reason for living was to protect the bears.
Every week I must move 1 mile after staying for 7 consecutive days. If I was to do that here, I would not be able to study these bears. I would not be able to really protect them. I'd have to actually move out of the bay.
But in 2003, he and his girlfriend, Amy, were killed and partially eaten by a bear while the camera was still rolling. The director, Werner Herzog, used over 100 hours of Treadwell's own footage to tell the story, as well as interviews with his friends, experts, and park officials. It's not even a spoiler to point out that he dies at the end.
Let me tell you, honestly, camping in grizzly country is dangerous.
The movie opens with that, which leaves the audience with this deep feeling that everything is going to go horribly wrong in a way that feels inevitable. Every scene documents Timothy's love for the animals and his fearlessness around them. He's shown petting foxes and lecturing or hugging bears. So from the very beginning, we know exactly how he's going to die. We just don't know when it's coming. But Herzog doesn't want to make you think Timothy is just some very good guy. The footage does the work for him, showing that Timothy was, at his best, deeply complicated. A failed actor battling addiction and loneliness who found purpose in the wilderness, yet fatally underestimated its dangers.
It's good work. I feel good about it. I feel good about myself doing it. And I want to continue. And I hope I can. I really hope I can. But if not, be warned. I will die for these animals. I will die for these animals. I will die for these animals.
Between those scenes of animal love, we see much darker, more emotional moments. He tearfully rants about societal rejection or makes erratic claims, believing that he can change the weather and protect animals through sheer willpower. And it all leads us to that moment, where the audio recording of the fatal attack comes out, yet we don't hear the full thing. Only Herzog and Timothy's ex-girlfriend hear it. Herzog describes it as the most terrifying thing I've ever heard. They called him mostly harmless. In 2018, the body of an emaciated hiker was discovered in Florida's Big Cypress National Preserve. He carried no identification, but he was known on the trail as mostly harmless. The documentary, They Call Him Mostly Harmless, is all about getting answers about this mysterious man. The movie follows the 2-year effort to identify him, interviewing the hikers, investigators, and amateur detectives who eventually identify the man as Vance Rodriguez, a tech worker.
Christy, his name is Vance Rodriguez. My husband worked with him in Shopper's Choice.
But at its core, what makes this movie so disturbing is how it dissects the true crime community, us. The documentary digs into the internet investigations around the case and the collective delusion that built within. These communities were constructing elaborate, often fantastical narratives about Vance Rodriguez. They suspected he was a cancer patient, an extraterrestrial, or a time traveler. Some of them projected a totally fabricated image that he was a gentle wanderer. But then the truth comes out, revealing a deeply troubled man with a history of abuse to his partners and emotionally volatile to those who encounter him. And suddenly, everything changes. These Facebook groups devolve into rival factions, moderators weaponizing personal attacks to hurt others who disagree, and innocent individuals are falsely accused of being Rodriguez. The movie is framed as an investigation into a missing person, but under it all, it's a cautionary tale about parasocial relationships and just how creepy it is that we, as strangers, get so emotionally invested in a dead man that we totally overshadow his flawed humanity. These people turned an abuser into a hero and then lashed out once the reality became clear. Earthlings. Earthlings is not a movie for the faint-hearted animal lovers out there. This documentary is designed to be excruciatingly uncomfortable, taking a very close look at humanity's exploitation of animals across the pet, food, clothing, entertainment, and science industries. The filmmakers managed to sneak hidden camera footage into factory farms, puppy mills, slaughterhouses, and research labs, getting up-close evidence of rampant and systemic cruelty to animals, all in the name of profit. And it doesn't shy away from anything, making it extremely hard to watch. The movie is unflinching in portraying the reality of these environments. Scenes show live animals getting for fur, dogs forcibly bred via racks, and livestock subjected to brutal slaughter methods despite the facilities claiming humane practices. Workers in these environments taunt and torture their animals in ways that force the viewer not to turn away. The whole argument of the movie is that all animal exploitation is rooted in speciesism, a superiority toward animals that humans hold. It argues that we as humans are making fundamentally poor everyday decisions that allow these practices to continue, and that has a major effect on the audience. Many viewers have said that the movie was so life-changing and visceral that it convinced them to shift to veganism. But the movie's aggressively shocking and not at all nuanced approach has also convinced more people to dismiss it entirely. In fact, one of the biggest complaints was that the movie never even mentioned the possibility of legal reform, that these extreme cases could be tackled by laws. Instead, it puts all responsibility on the audience, who have very little power in controlling these issues. But those who loved the movie loved it. In 2020, Maxim Krivosh took hostages on a bus in Ukraine. Among other things, he demanded that the president, Volodymyr Zelensky, release a video recommending that all citizens watch the movie. The president did make that video, and then deleted it once the hostages were released, which means few people probably ended up watching what could have been a very life-changing documentary. Level 2. Bowling for Columbine. Michael Moore's Bowling for Columbine examines the difficult subject of gun violence in America through the lens of the 1999 Columbine High School massacre, one of the deadliest school shootings in the history of the United States.
Investigators say this attack appears to have been carefully planned for a long time.
The movie uses the incident to highlight and criticize U.S. gun culture, media-induced fear, and systemic inequality, while challenging simplistic and usually reductive explanations for violence like blaming violent media or music. Part of the reason the movie was so impactful is how it highlights the issues in America when it comes to guns. More specifically contrasts scenes showing how easy it is to get a gun, including a moment where he gets a free rifle from a bank, with seriously harrowing footage and audio calls from the Columbine attack to show just how inevitable the shooting was, thanks to the pro-gun American system. The documentary argues that America and its citizens have created the environment for school shootings, and it heavily implies that it will continue down that path. Even interviews with pro-gun people like celebrated actor and then NRA President Charlton Heston are troubling to watch, as Charlton refuses to blame guns for violence and instead blames mixed ethnicity.
You don't have any opinion, though, as to why that is, that we are the unique country, the only country that does this, that kills each other on this level with guns?
Well, we have probably more mixed ethnicity than other countries, some other countries.
When the movie came out, it won the Academy Award, but the audience was less enthusiastic, accusing him of omitting some pretty key points and exploiting survivors of the attack to make his argument. But in 2025, when more and more school shootings continue on American soil, it's a pretty disturbing watch to realize how easy it is in America to pull off this kind of domestic terrorism. Kaniba. In 1981, a Japanese man named Issei Sagawa gained international infamy after and his Dutch classmate René Hartvelt in Paris. The court case that followed pretty quickly declared him legally insane, forcing him to spend 15 months in a Japanese psychiatric hospital before being released. But when he did get out, he just profited from his crime through writing, and media appearances. Kaniba is a documentary that digs deep into who Issei is beyond the controversy. It specifically focuses on his seemingly mundane, everyday relationship with his brother Jun, which doesn't sound that disturbing, but it is. The movie is extremely intimate with Issei, using extreme close-ups of his stroke-paralyzed face to force us into his mind. When he talks and reflects on his crimes, he seems more concerned about himself and how he will end up. He shows no remorse for any of the things he's done. He seems entirely unfazed by all of it. But in his art, he is even worse. The movie uses archival footage of Issei's self-drawn manga depicting graphic his way of expressing the desires he's legally not allowed to express in the world. And through it all, his brother Jun is right there. The movie shows that Jun is not a willing accomplice, but deeply conflicted over who his brother is and what he's done. He's vocally opposed to the actions, but he loves his brother too much to cut all ties. But the thing that lingers the most for audiences is that the movie never picks a side. At no point in the movie do the filmmakers force the audience to condemn or sympathize. It just presents Issei's view of the world and allows us to make a choice on how we feel about it. Which means some people watching the movie will inevitably find deep sympathy or even identify in a cannibal. And that's not a comfortable thought. Tickled. Tickled follows David Ferrier, a New Zealand journalist who hears about the strange world of competitive endurance tickling, involving videos featuring young men being restrained and tickled. But when he tries to dig into the subject, he finds that the people involved want nothing to do with journalists or publicity. His quirky human interest story grows increasingly dark as Jane O'Brien Media, the shadowy organization behind the videos, bombard him with legal threats and homophobic abuse. People who appeared in the video reveal intense exploitation, harassment, and legal threats to prevent them from speaking out about the videos, which they were coerced or blackmailed into. Ultimately, it all leads David to unravel a network of coercion tied to David D'Amato, a wealthy former school administrator with a history of cybercrimes and defamation campaigns against participants who speak out. D'Amato's operation used all of its legal power to blackmail participants with threats to expose their involvement, damaging careers and personal friendships. Critics were silenced with tactics like doxing, fake personas, and the leaking of audition tapes without consent, or retaliatory emails sent to employers accusing them of deviance. Audiences loved Tickled, but what they loved about it is exactly what is so horrifying and disturbing. The movie begins as this harmless, quirky, kind of weird story, only to gradually dig deeper and unravel an absurd and ultimately horrifying network of systemic abuse. By the end of the movie, David Ferrier finally confronts David D'Amato, who threatens him with legal action.
There is a legal issue about me suing you right now.
Is there?
Yes. You're in this country on a tourist visa. By doing anything related to so-called journalism, you're in violation of the federal law here. I'll be back for a long time.
I'm on a journalism visa.
But Ferrier makes one final reach to D'Amato's stepmother, who ends the movie acknowledging her stepson's tickling obsession and dropping the final, most disturbing reveal in the movie. she's still deeply afraid of what her stepson can do.
I think he has a split personality. It's like that fine line between genius and insanity.
Southern Comfort. Southern Comfort documents the final year in Robert Eads' life. Robert was a transgender man in rural Georgia who died of ovarian cancer after being denied treatment by over 20 doctors due to nothing more than transphobia. The film follows Robert's life as he navigates his relationship with his partner, a transgender woman named Lola Cola, reconnects with his biological family, who struggle to accept his identity, and leans on his chosen family of transgender friends. The movie forces the audience to sit through and witness the systemic medical neglect that Robert endures, rooted in their own interests, prejudice, and bias. Robert's ovarian cancer metastasized after repeated rejections from physicians who feared treating a transgender patient would harm their reputation.
There was 2 or 3 of the doctors that were at least honest enough to just say point blank, I'm sorry, but it would be too much of an embarrassment to my other patients to have you in here. They were afraid of losing business.
They put their personal careers over the safety, well-being, and literal life of a patient. In one scene, Robert confronts it, pointing out that the last truly female part of me is killing me. But the filmmakers know that they have to show more than just one person's struggle to really hit home. This is a problem for many more people than just Robert. Robert's friends recount their own botched surgeries and experience with inappropriate discriminatory practices, even as he suffers a rapid and painful physical decline. And through it all, his family just dig deeper, with his son telling him that Robert will always be mom to me. After seeing the movie, many medical professionals went on the record to apologize to Robert for the multiple systemic failures in the medical community, but it was too late. Robert died of his cancer. And in a time when the U.S. is attacking the rights of transgender people, this movie shows just how fragile their existence can be from the very people who are supposed to keep them alive. Level 3. Titicut Follies. Frederick Wiseman's Titicut Follies is not just a documentary. It's a landmark documentary made to expose the inhumane conditions at Massachusetts Bridgewater State Hospital for the criminally insane. The movie is filmed in stark black and white, capturing every moment of the inmates suffering under the dehumanizing treatment of the guards and institution. These inmates endure forced psychological abuse and force feeding before being made to take part in the bizarre and sinister in-prison talent show, The Titicut Follies. The movie is made to highlight the unflinching nature of systemic cruelty within these institutions. There are entire scenes where guards mock patients during humiliating routines, like forcibly shaving a man while taunting him about his filthy cell, none of which he can do anything about. One inmate, diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, argues his mental state has deteriorated due to institutional neglect. A harrowing force-feeding scene shows a tube inserted into a patient's nose as a staff member's cigarette ash contaminates the food. It's just one horrific situation after another, and the director refuses to contextualize any of it. Just have to watch as these patients are confined to barren, furniture-free cells, often naked, with minimal medical or psychological care, and forced to survive. From the second the movie released, controversy instantly erupted. Massachusetts banned the film in 1967, citing privacy violations, but it was obvious that the state was just trying to censor the movie and avoid scrutiny of their own behavior. It soon became the first American movie to be censored for reasons unrelated to obscenity or national security. Courts banned any screenings of the movie until 1991, at which point most patients had died. As the movie reached a larger audience, it became an important piece of history, spurring reforms in institutional care. In 2022, it was officially announced that Titicut Follies earned preservation in the National Film Registry for its cultural and historical significance. Voyeur. Voyeur follows journalist Gay Talese as he investigates Gerald Foose, a Colorado motel owner who modified his property with hidden vents and an attic observation platform to spy on guests for decades. Talise digs deep into Foos's voyeuristic research, including many recorded encounters, drug deals, and even an alleged Throughout the movie, Foos shows absolutely no regret or remorse for his actions. He believes that his voyeurism was not controversial or wrong. He claims it was a sociological study, though he does admit to deriving voyeuristic pleasure, even while watching his guests without their knowledge or consent. And then he admits that he witnessed a murder and did absolutely nothing to stop it.
This guy up there, the voyeur, is watching this, and of course doing nothing.
All of this is very complicated in itself, but Talise as a journalist doesn't make it any easier. Initially, he defends Foos as a harmless, if weird guy who isn't really hurting anyone with his creepy actions. As the movie goes on, he starts to dig into and confront the gaps in the story that Foos is telling him. But social media did not like what Talise did. The movie was a success, and Foos was widely criticized as a creepy, cocky predator. But Talise got ripped apart online, with people furious that he failed to verify basically any of the claims made by Foos, and the questionable ethics of glamorizing this man who exploited many, many people without their knowledge. 3 Identical Strangers. In 1980, Bobby Shafran arrived on the campus of a New York college and was instantly mistaken for a man called Eddie Gallant. Everywhere he went, he was mistaken for this guy.
Eddie, how are you? Eddie, hi. I'm like, my name's not Eddie. I don't know what you're talking about. I just got up here.
When he went and met Eddie, the both bonded over their adoptions and realized they were twins separated from birth. The story took the world by storm, and months later, the publicity reached David Kellman, who also looked just like these guys and was adopted, leading them all to the conclusion that they were identical triplets. Decades later, the documentary 3 Identical Strangers digs into this story, as well as the truth behind the triplets' birth separation. The boy's mother made a deal with psychiatrists Peter D. Neubauer and Viola W. Bernard to give up her children in the name of his experiment. Neubauer wanted to understand the nature of parenting styles and economic levels, so the 3 boys were separated and placed with different families, one working class, one middle class, and one wealthy, to see how they would turn out. But the boys and their adoptive families had no idea any of this was going on. The reveal of the experiment changes the tone of the entire movie, and it horrified the audiences who never saw it coming. These babies had their entire lives changed because one man wanted to treat them as lab rats in a study that prioritized data over their basic human dignity.
Peter started thinking, wouldn't it be interesting to have a study of mothers who wanted to give up their children who happened to be identical twins?
All 3 of them exhibited severe separation anxiety as infants, like headbanging or breath holding, and all of them struggled with mental health as adults. By 1995, Eddie committed suicide, which was later linked to depression and unresolved attachment trauma. The full research document written by Neubauer is legally required to remain sealed until 2065, preventing the boys from even understanding the controversial experiment that ruined their lives from birth. The Red Chapel. The Red Chapel follows Danish journalist Mads Brugger and 2 Danish-Korean comedians, Jakob Nossel, who has cerebral palsy, and Simone Yule, as they infiltrate North Korea under the guise of a cultural exchange. The 3 of them pose as a theater troupe, but all the while they covertly critique the regime's propaganda machinery while navigating strict state control over their performances.
Det er jo stadig diktatur, er det ikke det?
Jo.
Det vælger vi ikke at kalde det.
Ja. Diktatur, det skal der sige. Ja, diktatur.
Of course, the hidden footage is approved daily by the North Korean censors who are totally unaware of its subtext. The movie is actually weirdly funny, but also deeply haunting as we see what life is like under a defiantly authoritarian leader. Especially for Jakob, as a disabled man in a country accused of systemic abuse toward people with disabilities. But what makes the documentary truly unsettling is its layers of manipulation. While the filmmakers mocked the regime's absurdity, North Korean officials enthusiastically co-opted the troops' act, rewriting their slapstick comedy into pro-regime propaganda, and even hiding Jakob's disability during performances to maintain the illusion of perfection. It takes almost no time for Jakob to become deeply conflicted about their mission, torn between his role in the satirical charade and his moral outrage. All of it forces him to a breaking point when he's forced to participate in a mass rally where he refuses to salute Kim Jong-il.
For min skyld.
Brugger is forced to make increasingly unethical compromises just to keep everyone alive, lying to hosts, mistranslating Jakob's critiques, and exploiting his collaborators to get the mission done.
He says he's very impressed about it, but he will need to, he's, you know, it's a very, you know, big scene for him, so he's trying to understand what's happening.
He's basically becoming just as corrupt as the government he's mocking.
I had no moral scruples at all, not when dealing with the North Koreans.
In fact, he ended up being widely criticized in reviews when the movie came out, forcing him to publicly voice his anti-North Korean stance when challenged. He claims that everything he did in the movie he did to ensure the truth was told, but he effectively sold his friends out for one movie, and whether it was worth it is all up to you to decide. Jesus Camp. In North Dakota, a group of children aged between 6 and 12 are brought into Kids on Fire, a Pentecostal Christian summer camp led by Pastor Becky Fisher. According to Fisher, these children are soldiers for God, tasked with advancing conservative evangelical values in America, and this is their training camp. Jesus Camp is a documentary that digs into this bizarre and deeply unsettling world. These children are forced to undergo intense religious training with activities including intense prayer sessions, speaking in tongues, and political activism, such as attending or speaking at anti-abortion rallies and prayers for then-President George W. Bush's judicial appointments. The movie explores the deeply unsettling world of childhood indoctrination, or brainwashing. These children are shown crying over their supposed sins, smashing mugs labeled government to symbolize opposition to the separation of church and state, and being taught that Harry Potter is evil and that science is unreliable.
No more, Lord. No more. No more!
But as if all of this is not extremely disturbing as it is, Becky Fisher wants her kids to be seriously brainwashed. The documentary includes her comparing her methods to those of extreme groups, saying that she wants her Christian youths to be as radically devoted as child soldiers in radical Islam. She's on camera pressuring kids as young as 5 to confess impure thoughts or chant political slogans about overturning Roe v. Wade, an abortion law these children don't even understand. Of course, the movie didn't change any minds that were not already in their own opinion.
You made a covenant with God tonight that you're going to pray to end abortion in America. Don't take that lightly. Don't be a promise breaker.
Many people condemned the camp, but evangelical audiences defended Fisher's mission, arguing that the movie was a hit piece by anti-Christian figures. Becky Fisher no longer runs a children's Christian camp, but she does continue to train children in the Word of God with her own company and continues to preach extremist ideals. Goodnight, Sugar Babe: The Killing of Vera Jo Rigel. In 2011, a 24-year-old mentally disabled woman named Vera Jo Rigel was in Findlay, Ohio.
They had her laying, instead of having her laying on the rails, they had her laying in between the tracks.
Goodnight, Sugar Babe: The Killing of Vera Jo Rigel explores the in intimate, disturbing detail. The filmmakers expose how Vera, who was already a victim of systemic neglect due to her condition, was manipulated, abused, and ultimately killed by members of the Brooks family, led by matriarch Sherry Sugarbabe Brooks. While 2 individuals were convicted for her murder, the film argues that Sherry orchestrated the crime to gain custody of Vera's daughter, escaping prosecution herself. But the movie is brutal when it comes to Vera's abuse and the depravity of the Brooks family. Interviews with perpetrators and witnesses reveal Vera was subjected to horrific acts that are unimaginably twisted and sick. She was allegedly forced to sleep in a closet with a pig, with a plunger, fed dog feces, and beaten regularly by Sherry's sons and their associates. And Sherry, who's likened to a female Charles Manson for her control over the family, allegedly encouraged incestuous relationships among her children, her grandchildren. The movie increasingly paints a picture of endless, increasingly monstrous torture and mistreatment, all of which was ignored by 911 calls and social workers' negligence, which allowed Vera to remain in the abusive environment.
She was such a frequent flyer, as we call them, that you could answer the phone, and as soon as she says the first word, you know who it is.
The nature of the abuse this woman suffered is truly horrific to have even listened to. But the movie forces the viewers to confront the nature of it and the people that committed these cruel, sadistic acts and their total lack of remorse. The Last Stop. The Last Stop examines the dark legacy of the Ellen School, a controversial behavior modification facility in rural Maine that operated from 1970 to 2011. Former residents describe being forcibly taken from their homes and subjected to public humiliation, forced labor, and psychological manipulation, all under the guise of therapy.
It used to be that we had bad kids who were locked away in reform schools and sick kids who were locked away in mental hospitals.
The guy who founded the facility, Joe Ritchie, was a convicted felon with no formal education in psychology, and he oversaw a system where peer-enforced and dehumanizing rituals were extremely common. The movie features the survivors recounting these horrifying abuses, including being forced to wear degrading costumes like tampon crowns, enduring 18-hour work shifts, and participating in therapy sessions led by untrained peers who screamed insults and threats at one another. And if the stories aren't bad enough, the movie used archival audio to make viewers really feel the horrors from within. Clips show Ritchie's authoritarian rhetoric, while animations visualize the survivors' traumatic memories, their confinement to a 9-foot square for months, or beatings by fellow students. This is a depressingly common situation, a self-policing hierarchy that ends up mirroring cult dynamics, with older students perpetuating to gain favor from staff. Similar things have happened in other prison institutes, such as the Stanford Prison Experiment. The movie ended up reigniting debates about the lack of oversight in these kinds of programs and the ethical implications of this kind of behavior modification. The Ellen School eventually closed in 2011, ending decades of abuse. Level 4. Our Father. An Indianapolis fertility specialist named Dr. Donald Klein had a secret. A big one. Between the 1970s and the 2000s, he had been secretly impregnating dozens of patients with his own sperm. Lucy Jordan's Our Father follows Jacoba Ballard, who discovered through a 23andMe test that she had at least 7 half-siblings, all of them linked to Klein. As more siblings emerged, eventually reaching over 90 of them, the survivors uncovered Klein's systematic deception, which violated an unthinkable amount of medical ethics and left families grappling with their totally unknown trauma. It's really obvious why this movie is so disturbing. Klein was once revered as a miracle worker, but he was taking advantage of his patients' vulnerability and inseminating them without consent. The movie makes that very clear, and it does so by reenacting it. Klein's clinical procedures are described in detail, while recordings of his dismissive conversations with survivors underscore his total and complete lack of remorse.
We have that burden to tell the truth, and the truth matters.
And through it all, the legal system completely fails the victims. Klein faced nothing more than a fine and the loss of his medical license after pleading guilty to obstruction of justice. At that time, fertility fraud was not criminalized in Indiana, something the documentary notes as a complete injustice. The movie hits its mark. Viewers were outraged, saying it's one of the most disturbing things I've ever watched. The misogyny and institutional failures make it clear that this could happen again at any time, and that the perpetrator could easily get away with it all. Holy Hell. Will Allen's Holy Hell is one of those documentaries that is extremely personal to the filmmaker. For 22 years, Will was involved in the Buddhafield cult led by the charismatic Michel Rostand, also known as Andreas or Reggie. Will was the group's videographer, responsible for capturing as much footage to be used in promotional material to recruit more to their cause. So his film uses that footage alongside interviews with former members, tracing the community's evolution from a 1980s West Hollywood spiritual collective to an isolated hierarchy. The early footage in the movie could not be more appealing and charming, making it disturbingly clear why it would be used in propaganda. Members dancing in fields or meditating suggests a good, happy time is being had by everyone. But then, we start to see the darker side and the truth behind Michel's intentions. We discover that Michel, a failed actor and dancer who claimed enlightenment, initially attracted followers with these meditation sessions and utopian ideals, but gradually imposed control through manipulation, enforced celibacy, and exploitation of male members under the guise of spiritual healing.
The master only represents God on the earth. And if you can't stand in front of your master, you can stand in front of your God.
Former followers describe how he demanded absolute devotion and pressured women into entire sequences show how Michel used their isolation against the members, severing ties between them and their families while fostering dependency entirely on him. So while the movie is clear in its opinion on Michel and the cult, it skips over Will's place in the cult. It's clear from the footage that he was good at what he did, but as the group's propagandist, he was just as responsible and complicit as anybody else. And this movie feels like him trying to justify what he did and separate himself from a cult he once attempted to normalize. Tell Them You Love Me. In 2009, Anna Stubblefield, a white ethics professor, was attempting to help Derek Johnson, a nonverbal black man with cerebral palsy. She was using facilitated communication, FC, a scientifically discredited method involving physical assistance to type to allegedly unlock Derek's ability to express complex thoughts. It seemed to work. Derek's family were thrilled with his progress, but they soon began to suspect nothing was what it seemed.
It was like the porch lights went on, and I was like, wow, is he doing it? And I felt very excited about it.
The messages were justifying an apparent relationship between the two of them, messages that the family suspected were not coming from Derek. Tell Them You Love Me is Louis Theroux's deep dive into the story and the 2015 criminal trial that changed everything. The movie actually delves into the idea of Stubblefield physically guiding Derek's hands during typing sessions, seemingly forcing him to write what she wants him to write. It's as if she knows that what she's doing is wrong and that she just needs him to justify it.
The things that really bothered him was that he hadn't had the opportunity to get a formal education of any sort. His brother was getting a doctoral degree, so he had watched his brother and the whole process, and he really wanted to have that also.
The racial implications are also impossible to ignore. She's been viewed as a predator preying on vulnerable communities and innocent people to take what she wants. In her interviews, she positions herself as Derek's liberator, while his family fights to protect him from what they view as exploitation. Ultimately, Stubblefield was convicted of assault, as the court found that Derek was unable to effectively communicate his emotions and consent. Viewers also have no doubt that Stubblefield did this. She was in a position of power and abused the one person who relied on her more than any other. Children Underground. Edith Belzberg's Children Underground documents the lives of 5 homeless children living in Bucharest's subway stations following Romania's post-communist collapse. Christina, Mihai, Macarena, Anna, and Marian, all of them between the ages of 8 and 16, survive by panhandling, stealing, and inhaling Aralac, a toxic industrial paint. If that's all you knew of this movie, it would be troubling enough. But Belzberg doesn't just want to see their daily struggles. He wants to understand them and the trauma that got them there. He discovers that their backgrounds reveal extreme and consistent neglect. Fleeing an abusive orphanage, escaping an alcoholic father, and leaving extreme poverty and sexual abuse. His camera captures them in their own bodies, inhaling solvents and enduring beatings to get through the day. And at no point does the filmmaker try to intervene. He just captures the scene unfolding. The entire documentary toys with moral dilemmas, and it makes us complicit in their approach. Audiences pointed out the contradiction. The movie is openly criticizing societal apathy that puts these children in situations like this, while refusing to do anything about it when it unfolds before them. But Belzberg is trying to point out something bigger. This is a legacy of Romania's ban on birth control. These children were not wanted, and now their existence is bleak and grim. This is the life of street kids. The end of the movie reveals and confirms the children's tragic trajectories. Christina became a mother estranged from her kids, while Mihai's brief respite in Belgium dissolved into instability. The other children supposedly went on to find homes or families, but we have no idea what happened decades later. The Family I Had. In 2007, on Super Bowl Sunday, 13-year-old Paris Lee strangled and stabbed his 4-year-old sister Ella 17 times in a fit of rage.
Is she bleeding anywhere?
Yeah, she's bleeding all over the bed. Because I stabbed her.
The Family I Had deals with the aftermath, delving into the complex dynamics of the Lee family as they grapple with this inexplicable act of violence. The filmmakers want you to experience this the same way the family did. So from the first frame, we see archival footage of Paris and Ella opening Christmas gifts together. These are the happy times that we know are not going to last, and it just makes it all the more horrifying knowing what's around the corner. But the film's most unsettling moments don't involve the actual murder. They come from one-on-one interviews with the key family members. Charity, the mother, recounts the devastating moment she learned of her daughter's death and her son's involvement, effectively losing both children in an instant.
She needs her mother, and then they said, well, she's dead.
But then we get to Paris, who's interviewed from behind bars. For the first half of the movie, Paris discusses the deep remorse he feels for killing his sister. But then it's like something changes. Suddenly you get the chilling realization that he doesn't even care. He discusses the crime with an unsettling composure that suggests he would do it again.
One thing I accept is that I'm sane. And that kind of underlies everything. Now, did I have issues? Yes, I did. If I didn't have issues, I wouldn't have killed my sister.
As the filmmakers dig deeper, we unravel more and more of the unsettling truth in this family, and a long trail of intergenerational trauma within the Lee family. We discover that Charity herself experienced tragedy as a child when her father was murdered, and her mother was suspected of organizing a mafia hit on his life. It seems like this is a pattern, life repeating itself, and both times all she could do was watch. But this is exactly what angered viewers. Charity and her mother take no responsibility or accountability for anything throughout the documentary. They're sad that Ella died, but they don't seem willing to blame Paris for what he did. For a loving mother, it's oddly unsettling to see that she seems to think this was inevitable. Level 5. The Gift. The Gift centers on a world that most people will never have heard of: bug chasing. This documentary follows gay men who are dangerously and deliberately chasing HIV infection. These men engage in unprotected sex at events like standard fuck parties, where condoms are banned in the hopes they will be infected with this potentially fatal virus.
I want to be like all you guys, you all have it and I don't.
The movie features multiple HIV-positive men discussing the psychological toll of the HIV epidemic, including their survivor's guilt and how HIV has been normalized following medical therapies. But it also digs into the extreme downsides of the normalization campaigns, with AIDS activist Walt Odets critiquing public health campaigns for glamorizing HIV-positive lifestyles, and older survivors describing isolation and medication side effects like heart attacks.
I didn't know it was going to change so fast. No one told me.
Yet, the movie still shows young men chasing these infections in the most self-destructive way. They view it as empowerment to have this virus. When one of them contracts HIV, he's happy, saying, "I don't have to worry about getting AIDS anymore."
Yes, I have. And I totally trusted the person. Like the ad says, it wasn't, oh, I'm pretty sure he's safe, but I knew for a fact.
After everything we've seen about the devastating effect of the virus, it feels insane to even think about someone happy to have it. Bug chasing is such a small subculture in the gay scene that many gay activists and groups were not happy about the movie, believing it was fueling homophobic stereotypes.
I have never heard of bug chasing. I have heard of bug chasing. I didn't know I have heard of bug chasing on the internet.
These intense scenes of mass unprotected sex and the fetishization of the gift made it seem as though young gay men were dismissing the trauma of their elder peers. But the fact is that these men do exist, and the documentary perfectly captures their troubling worldview and raises the question of just how many people they're now infecting with the virus they wanted. The Act of Killing. Joshua Oppenheimer's The Act of Killing does something that few documentaries do. It doesn't just examine the nature of or genocide. It forces the perpetrators to recreate it on camera, and the end result is deeply unsettling.
Tapi kita harus tunjukkan bahwasanya inilah sejarah, inilah dia, inilah kita.
The movie examines Indonesia's 1965 to 1966 anti-communist purges through the perspectives of those perpetrators. Specifically, it centers on Anwar Congo and his associates, the former death squad leaders, who participated in the mass killings of over 1 million alleged communists, ethnic Chinese, and intellectuals.
Mungkin ya banyak hantunya, karena di sini tuh banyak manusia yang dihabisi, yang mati nggak wajar, yang mati yang tidak wajar.
But Oppenheimer knows these people aren't going to open up if he just asks them to tell him. He has to give them something, so he invites them to reenact their atrocities in the style of Hollywood genres they idolize. Through film noir, westerns, and musical aesthetics, we see the perpetrators casually describing massacres, rap, and torture, framing themselves as heroes while the victims remain voiceless. That cold moral detachment is what makes this movie so genuinely harrowing to watch. While Anwar initially revels in recounting his brutal methods, such as strangling victims with wire to avoid bloodstains,
Beginilah caranya supaya jangan darah itu keluar banyak.
The reenactments gradually expose his psychological unraveling. And the surreal reenactments, like a chaotic village massacre staged with fireworks and children screaming, are designed to make us view these violent acts the way they do.
Jangan dikasih pain.
they're heroes in their mind. There's a particularly interesting moment where Anwar attempts to reconcile his actions, revisiting one of his killing sites. But when he gets there, he gags, revealing some unresolved trauma but no genuine remorse for what he did.
Hati nurani saya yang mengatakan harus dihabiskan.
Over time, these killers even co-opt the documentary process, coercing survivors to relive trauma during filming. It's a horrific thing. The movie was extremely well received, but critics were angry that the victims had no voice. So Oppenheimer made a sequel, The Look of Silence, to tell their stories in a way that was no less harrowing. Mondo Cane. In the 1960s, Italian documentaries were all the rage, and filmmakers were constantly competing to try and horrify the largest amount of people. 1962's Mondo Cane is no different. This shockumentary stitches together global scenes of cultural practices, rituals, and taboos, presenting it as a travelogue. We see contrasting and conflicting scenes ranging from animal slaughter and tribal rites to bizarre culinary traditions, blending real footage with staged or manipulated sequences to create such a visceral, unsettling experience that audiences loathed it. The movie forces viewers to confront the damage we inflict on animals, showing scenes of geese force-fed for foie gras, animals slaughtered in Hong Kong markets, and sharks by Pacific Islanders as part of tradition. Human rituals such as New Guinea tribes fattening women for marriage or Taiwanese mourners hiring professional wailers are presented as if we should just sit back and watch. Even the narration adopts a mocking Eurocentric tone, contrasting civilized norms in Western nations with these savage, primitive practices, reinforcing the colonialist biases from centuries earlier.
Under a huge sky, at the top of very high mountains that seem to lift the earth to the very source of light, man lives still surrounded by darkness.
People hated this movie. Sure, the novelist J.G. Ballard praised it. He saw much value in the movie as a criticism of the modern world, but animal rights activists were outraged by the scenes of real brutality, which remain disturbing even by modern standards. Yet, this movie kickstarted an entire genre of its own. Mondo Cane influenced later documentaries and even reality TV, normalizing shock as entertainment. It changed the world, and most of us never even heard about it. Level 6. Glory. Glory examines across 3 distinct international cultures rarely explored in the media: Thailand's fish tank brothel, Bangladesh's City of Joy red light district, and Mexico's Reynosa tolerance zone. But this documentary doesn't have a point to prove. There's no contextualizing anything, no narration, no interviews. We simply watch and observe the daily lives of sex workers negotiating exploitation, poverty, and survival. And it's as dark and harrowing as you would expect. The documentary captures the dehumanizing aspect of the sex industry in brutal, unflinching imagery. In Bangladesh, the camera captures child trafficking and forced unpaid labor, including a scene where a madam haggles over the price of a girl as if purchasing an animal like livestock. Mexico's settlement is no less brutal. Here, the movie highlights graphic, unsimulated acts and crack addiction among workers, making for a more physically unpleasant and repulsive response from the viewers. If Bangladesh was a moral objection, this one is just downright awful to have to witness.
Ya, me pagan y disfruten. Entonces...
And Thailand's fish tank contrasts superficial glamour with the unsettling dehumanization and objectification of women, showing clients selecting their partners through glass partitions using numbers, not names. All of the women were paid to participate in the movie, but that in itself is an uncomfortable thought. None of the women in this movie are in a good place. They're doing this job to survive and escape a life of poverty, meaning that they need the money. So this movie is not made with their willing consent, but a necessity. Or, to put it another way, the movie is exploiting these women even more. Ultimately, the movie doesn't say anything specific about the nature of this job, but it's unrelentingly bleak, and critics have argued that the movie, with its dramatic lighting and haunting soundtrack, romanticizes the suffering of these women.
You snake! You crawl between my legs!
What is clear, though, is that it paints a very, very grim picture of a life where is a job. Africa Adio. When it was released in 1966, Africa Adio got one hell of a reaction. The United Nations denounced it, saying it was full of gross distortions, while African leaders condemned its highly controversial nature, arguing that it ignored the continent's post-independence progress to fetishize violence. So what exactly did the movie do to upset so many people? Africa Adio was directed by two Italian men who wanted to explore the topic of Africa's transition from colonialism to independence. So they went out and shot across Kenya, Zanzibar, Congo, and South Africa to get the full image of the story, but what comes of it is a disturbing and uncomfortably pro-colonial movie. The filmmakers capture the celebrations of Africa's newfound freedom and liberation, but they contrast it with graphic violence from the continent. We see tribal massacres, animal poaching, and political chaos like the Zanzibar Revolution, where 5,000 Arab and South Asian civilians were killed. All while a narrator points out that all of these executions, the cannibalism, the ecological destruction, came after liberation. The movie specifically says that decolonization was not freedom. It was a descent into brutality, allowing Africa to mirror the violent birth of Western nations. The imagery in the movie is extremely brutal. Beaches are littered with corpses, orphaned elephants are slaughtered by poachers, and an entire Arab village is wiped out in what the filmmakers claim is the only footage of this so-called genocide. But most of what they claim in the movie has never been proven. It's not known where much of the footage came from, but critics believe a significant amount of the movie has been staged, including the poaching and of very real animals, all for the sake of shock value. It's really no surprise that the international community rejected the movie. Even now, the authenticity of it remains totally unknown. While some archival researchers have said the movie has merit, the fact that it is so heavily Eurocentric and pro-colonization means that it will always be extremely disturbing. The movie is effectively arguing that the world should recolonize Africa because of its so-called savagery, an undeniably racist sentiment in an already troubling movie. Sound of Torture is really a portrayal of human suffering. The documentary follows the harrowing plight of Eritrean refugees kidnapped and tortured by Bedouin smugglers in Egypt's Sinai Desert while fleeing their respective homeland in 2006.
أنا بت استحبركوا والله حدا سبب عدزني مجمرة جزء زرقت لكم. جن أبتان مشتي ثلاثة عملت أخلاق جزء زارفكم قبل مستشوي زود كتو معلتي إذا راخ بالتليفون.
But it centers on Meron Estefanos, a Swedish-Eritrean journalist and activist who uses her radio show to amplify the voices of hostages forced to call families for ransom payments up to $40,000.
كندي تعرفك؟ إسران حموش نشح تعرفك؟
As the movie unfolds, we start to uncover more and more of what's going on in these hostage situations. Mothers are forbidden to care for their children. They're put through excruciating sessions. Pregnant women give birth while chained up in captivity. It just seems to get worse and worse. And the phone recordings are excruciating and heartbreaking to listen to.
It's what مجبوهم سرعة قربوا له دونت ولا عهنا تسأل.
حمالة كمو كده نعملوا
At one point, Maron visits Sinai torture camps disguised as a Bedouin woman, hoping to see what's going on for herself. On the outskirts of the camps, she finds a lot of children's shoes and clothing, confirming her worst suspicions. And when she finally gets inside, she finds the burial places of over 800 Africans, many of them children. These people were raped or tortured. And finally, she realizes that she can't help.
All this area, it is full of African. Here around, maybe 800 bodies. From here to the end, 800.
Those who do escape get no mercy and no justice. With the Europeans closing the borders, their only hope is to get into Israel. But those who make it to the border are shot and killed by Egyptian soldiers. And the European policies only make the crisis even worse, killing hundreds and thousands of innocent people due to their own ignorance. This is a problem that the world was complicit in continuing, and that is what the movie is forcing us to see.
Let's just sing for the picture of the girl.
Okay, no, Meron, you must know how I am suffering here. All these bodies, we have no refrigerator here.
What really troubles people about the movie is that there is no manipulation going on. There's no clever editing, no emotional manipulation. We see and hear what is happening for ourselves, and it is harrowing to sit through. The scale of the trauma lingers with you because of how depressingly avoidable it all was. Conspiracy of Silence. Conspiracy of Silence is a deeply ironic and strange documentary to feature on this list because it turned out to be so controversial and so uncomfortable that it never actually got released. The movie was supposed to air in 1994 on the Discovery Channel, but it turned out to be far, far too dangerous for the American people. The documentary investigates allegations of a nationwide child abuse and pedophilia ring linked to powerful political figures in the U.S. Specifically, it centers on the Franklin scandal, a 1980s case involving Omaha-based financier Lawrence King, who was accused of running a child trafficking operation tied to Nebraska's Franklin Community Federal Credit Union.
Larry King was, I would say, the center of transporting the children around the country.
Back in 1994, the revelations in this movie would have been shocking. Victims discuss how they were coerced into silence through intimidation, discrediting campaigns, and even violent deaths of key witnesses. The filmmakers include harrowing testimonies from survivors like Alicia Owen, who later faced imprisonment for perjury after she revoked her claims under pressure from those who committed the acts.
It was at that party that I met Larry King. At the time that I met Larry King, I did not know that he was Larry King. I had met him. That was the first time I'd ever met him.
But the real reason it got pulled? The documentary highlights the involvement of prominent figures in politics and law enforcement, suggesting a coordinated cover-up to protect powerful interests.
The compromising of politicians, the compromising of businessmen, but worst of all, the corruption of key institutions of government that have the duty and responsibility to make sure these things never happen.
The Discovery Channel could not deal with the political pressure it was facing, so the powerful people who had abused children for decades once again used their influence to escape justice. But even though it was canceled, the film leaked. Someone in the team believed that the movie had to be seen and leaked copies of the movie on VHS. Those tapes circulated and continue to be available online even today. Whether or not it's legit will never be known for sure, but the last-minute cancellation suggests somebody does not want this movie to be seen. Even today, the full movie is available on YouTube, but is removed almost every single year. Level 7. Junk films. Junk films is not your typical documentary. It's an impossibly hard watch, one that has split critics and viewers who debate whether it's art or morally unforgivable. The movie is directed by Japanese death photographer Kiyotaka Tsurisaki, and it's really a compilation of short shockumentaries exploring themes of mortality through unflinching graphic footage. We see scenes from all over the world, including mangled auto accident victims in Bangkok, rituals during Thailand's vegetarian festival, and decomposing corpses in Colombian landfills. There's no narrative, there's no commentary, no clear purpose. Kiyotaka is just presenting raw, voyeuristic glimpses into the graphic, disgusting reality of death, whether it's war aftermath or traditional funerals. The fact that there is nothing to comfort or ground us is exactly why this is so disturbing. It's just pure images of dead bodies, actual human remains. And let's not forget remains. Charred bodies, accident victims, and corpses mid-decomposition. When we go through our daily lives, we try not to think about death. This movie forces us to confront the reality of it. We are going to end up like one of these scenes, and if we're being honest, none of them are pleasant. One segment contrasts a sterile Japanese funeral ceremony with the chaotic blood-soaked rituals of Phuket. One respectful, one raucous and bloody. Because there's no context or judgment, we just have to take it in and process it. That's kind of the point. Kiyotaka has photographed thousands of dead bodies, becoming totally desensitized to it. Now we have to do the same whether we want to or not. That's part of why it's so divisive. To some, this is an artistic triumph and a celebration of life that challenges taboos. To others, it's gratuitous or morally bankrupt, not least because of the questionable use of corpse photography. But it's certainly not like any other movie. Just Melvin, Just Evil. James Ronald Whitney made Just Melvin, Just Evil for a reason. The movie is a harrowing examination of the legacy of his grandfather, Melvin Just, a serial child whose abuse spanned generations and whose legacy continues to haunt even today. The movie combines interviews with Melvin's victims, including Whitney's mother, aunts, and step-siblings, with footage of Melvin himself, who denies all allegations despite overwhelming evidence against him.
I didn't lose the goddamn kids.
But it goes even deeper than just a push. The documentary also explores Melvin's suspected of a social worker who discovered his crimes. That's a case that remains unsolved due to his deteriorating health preventing further discovery. Obviously, the biggest and most disturbing element of the movie is its painful exploration of systemic abuse. The movie shows that Melvin targeted the most vulnerable family members, including Pombi, who was seriously injured during one of his works and required extensive surgeries to correct her hips. Pombi later recounts being paid for sexual acts as recently as 2 years before filming, despite Melvin's confinement to a wheelchair. He never stopped, even in his final days. And the consequences of that on his victims was painful. Survivors describe lives marked by addiction, homelessness, and fractured relationships. By the time we get to Melvin's funeral, his relatives are swinging between grief and rage, with one aunt tearfully declaring, "Nobody's perfect," as if forgiving him for the unending and unthinkable trauma he has inflicted on his own family.
Yeah, he had his problems, does everybody.
Sure.
Everybody has their faults. Nobody's perfect. We weren't meant.
It's an exceptionally painful and honest movie. But people didn't like that so much of it revolved around James Ronald Whitney himself, believing the focus should have been more on the family. But even with that one criticism, you can't watch this documentary and not feel extremely uncomfortable and unsettled. Scenes show victims confronting Melvin, yet they display total ambivalence, even hugging him as if nothing happened. That alone is a deeply troubling thing to reckon with, especially since Melvin never pays the price for his crimes. Capturing the Friedmans. In the 1980s, Arnold Freeman, a respected Long Island computer teacher, and his youngest son Jesse were arrested for child molestation. What followed was an unraveling of the Friedman family as they reckoned with the reality of what their patriarch and his son had committed under their noses. Capturing the Friedmans interweaves home video filmed by the family during the crisis, police records, and interviews with relatives, investigators, and alleged victims to present the most complete and intimate version of what happened within the family after the arrests.
I was the first to visit my brother in prison. And that was a moment in my life I'll never forget.
The fact that the Friedmans themselves filmed this is unbelievable. The footage captures every meltdown, argument, and self-delusion as the Friedmans lash out at one another over the legal turmoil and reckon with how best to save their family. But the filmmaker goes beyond the family. The whole point of the movie is to question the legitimacy of the allegations, a highly controversial goal. The movie highlights inconsistencies in the case, with alleged victims giving contradictory testimonies, police methods that are unusually coercive and manipulative, and a lack of physical evidence. By the end, the movie flat out refuses to resolve whether Arnold and Jesse were guilty or victims of a moral panic fueled by 1980s-era hysteria over child abuse. Arnold eventually pleaded guilty and died in prison, while Jesse maintained his innocence despite accepting a plea deal.
19-year-old Jesse Friedman was arraigned on more than 198 additional counts of child. This brings the total number of charges to 245.
But as far as the filmmaker is concerned, it's not his place to judge. However, that's not the way others saw it. They believed that the movie deliberately omitted material that would have led to a more concrete and clear resolution. Jesse's 1989 televised confession and the role of a third defendant, Ross Goldstein, who corroborated abuse claims, would have led the viewers to the same conclusion as many: that they were guilty. That's what the survivors and their families claimed, accusing Cherokee of distorting facts to favor the Friedmans, or of omitting the truth to stay neutral and protect a notorious child abuser.